What if the most important treasure in One Piece was never stolen, just switched? A single question like that flips everything you think you know about the world of pirates, legends, and hidden history on its head. Because for years, we've been told that the world is chasing something absolute, the ultimate prize, the final island, the legendary treasure left behind by the Pirate King himself. But what if that entire pursuit has been built on a misunderstanding? What if the greatest secret in the world didn't disappear because someone took it, but because it was quietly replaced with something else entirely? And even more disturbing, what if that switch didn't happen by accident, but during one of the most chaotic and classified events in history? God Valley? That single possibility changes the tone of everything. Suddenly, every pirate, every marine, every hidden faction isn't just chasing a treasure. They're chasing a shadow of the real thing. And somewhere in that confusion lies a truth so dangerous that even the world government may have spent decades making sure nobody ever asks the right questions. Because in this version of events, the story doesn't begin with treasure being found. It begins with treasure being misidentified. Now imagine this: a mysterious object, whispered about as the Pirate Crown Jewel, a name that itself feels too symbolic to be random. Something so important that it's been tied to legends long before the current era even began. Something reportedly taken from a place called Hachinosu and transported under circumstances that never fully made sense, eventually linking itself to the chaos of God Valley. But here's where things get strange, because every detail surrounding it feels fragmented, almost deliberately incomplete. We know it's connected to the Rock's pirates, a crew so powerful that their existence alone reshaped the balance of the world. We know it appears in discussions that never fully resolve into answers. And yet, no one can clearly define what it actually is. A treasure, a symbol, a key, or something far more dangerous than gold or jewels? Theories begin to spiral when you consider how conveniently this crown jewel disappears from the center of attention, right as history itself becomes distorted. And then, almost like a missing puzzle piece that refuses to fit anywhere cleanly, the name Shanks appears in the same narrative space, sealed inside a treasure chest during the God Valley incident. That detail alone feels too specific to ignore. Because in a world where information is everything, why would a child, especially one who grows up to become one of the most influential figures in the sea, be hidden in something designed to carry treasure? Was it protection or misdirection? And if it was misdirection, then what exactly was the chest mistaken for? That question opens the door to something far more unsettling. The possibility that the crown jewel and the chest containing Shanks were somehow intertwined in a catastrophic case of mistaken identity. Imagine the chaos of God Valley, an event already so chaotic and classified that even the strongest figures in history refuse to fully explain it. In the middle of that chaos, objects are being moved, stolen, hidden, and reinterpreted in real time. Now imagine Roger's crew unknowingly retrieving a chest they believed contained treasure, only for that same chest to hold something completely different, while the actual crown jewel slips away unnoticed into obscurity. Suddenly, everything shifts. The world government, believing Roger stole the ultimate prize, begins an unprecedented pursuit. Pirates begin chasing rumors that are already corrupted. And the real treasure, the thing everyone is fighting over, remains hidden in plain sight, untouched, forgotten, or worse, disguised as something insignificant. That would mean history itself has been built on a simple but devastating error, and it raises a terrifying implication. If the most important treasure in the world was never actually taken, then the entire age of piracy has been fueled by a lie. A misunderstanding so large that it has shaped wars, alliances, betrayals, and the rise of legends without anyone realizing they were all chasing the wrong target. And in that distortion, figures like Roger, Garp, and even the hidden rulers of the world become pieces in a puzzle they never fully understood they were part of. And that leads directly to the final and most dangerous thought. The idea that this mystery doesn't just reshape history, it redefines every major figure in it. Because if the crown jewel was never truly stolen, then Roger's journey takes on a completely different meaning. Garp's involvement in God Valley becomes something far more complex than heroism or duty. And even the world government's obsession with suppressing certain truths begins to look less like control and more like damage containment. Every clue, every missing detail, every contradictory account suddenly starts pointing toward a single conclusion. Someone, somewhere, has been managing the flow of truth itself. And if that's true, then the implications stretch far beyond pirates and marines. It reaches into the hidden structures of power, into the shadows of Emu, and into the very foundation of what the world believes about its own history. Because a switched treasure doesn't just change ownership, it changes destiny. It changes who becomes king, who becomes an enemy, and who becomes forgotten. And by the end of this unraveling theory, one question lingers heavier than everything else combined. If the most important treasure in the world was never actually taken, then who has been protecting it all this time? And what happens when someone finally realizes it's still out there? The idea of the pirate crown jewel is one of those mysteries in One Piece that feels like it has always been there, even when no one is directly talking about it. It doesn't get the same spotlight as the One Piece itself, or the ancient weapons, or even Laugh Tale, yet it lingers in the background like something the story refuses to fully explain. That alone makes it suspicious. Because in a world where almost every major secret is eventually addressed or at least hinted at clearly, the crown jewel feels intentionally left in the shadows. It's not just missing information, it feels like controlled silence. A concept that predates the time skip, embedded deep in the lore, is mentioned in fragments, but never fully defined in a way that lets readers lock on to its true identity. And that's where the tension begins. Because Oda rarely hides something without purpose. When something is repeatedly referenced but never properly explained, it usually means the real answer is either too important, too dangerous, or too connected to the core of the world's hidden history. And the crown jewel fits that pattern perfectly, almost like a piece of the story that exists outside the normal rules of revelation. What makes the crown jewel even more intriguing is how strongly it is tied to the God Valley incident, one of the most classified and fragmented events in the entire series. God Valley itself is already a mystery wrapped in silence, an island that vanished from maps, a battle that involved the strongest pirates and marines of its era, and an event the world government actively avoids discussing in detail. Now, when you place the idea of the crown jewel into that setting, everything starts to feel deliberate rather than accidental. It suggests that whatever the crown jewel truly is, it wasn't just present at God Valley. It may have been central to why God Valley mattered at all. And yet, instead of being clearly defined as a treasure, weapon, or artifact, it remains abstract, almost like a title without a body. That vagueness is what makes it dangerous in narrative terms. Because in One Piece, the most important truths are often hidden not by absence, but by misdirection. The crown jewel feels like it belongs to that category, something everyone is indirectly circling without realizing they are circling it. And when something is tied to an erased island, a forbidden incident, and a buried era of history, it stops feeling like a simple treasure and starts feeling like a key to something much larger. Even more suspicious is how this concept feels like it has been intentionally left unconfirmed by Oda, almost as if the story itself is refusing to lock it into a single definition. There are many elements in One Piece that are mysterious, but they usually evolve over time into clearer threads. The crown jewel, however, behaves differently. It appears in theory spaces, fan interpretations, and fragmented narrative hints, but never fully stabilizes into canon clarity. That creates a strange effect. It feels less like a missing detail and more like a sealed concept, something that exists within the world, but is deliberately not allowed to fully surface yet. And when you connect that with the idea of God Valley, where even major figures like Roger and Garp have incomplete historical records, the implication becomes heavier. It suggests that the crown jewel might not just be a treasure in the traditional sense. It could be a narrative anchor point, something that explains why certain events happened the way they did, but cannot yet be openly revealed. In that sense, its absence is actually part of its function. The less it is explained, the more it shapes the mystery around it. And that is exactly the kind of storytelling pattern that signals something far more important is being protected underneath the surface. But the most unsettling thought is this: what if the crown jewel isn't missing at all? What if it hasn't been lost, stolen, or destroyed, but instead already exists within the story in plain sight, disguised so well that it has never been recognized for what it truly is? That possibility changes everything, because it suggests the mystery is not about discovery, but about recognition. It means the audience, and the world within One Piece, may have already crossed paths with it countless times without ever realizing it. Every reference, every vague mention, every disconnected theory could be fragments of something already present in the narrative structure. And that is where the transition begins to form. Because once you accept that the crown jewel is intentionally hidden rather than physically absent, the entire way you interpret the story shifts. You stop looking for something new and start questioning everything already shown. And that leads directly into a far more disturbing idea: that the greatest secret in One Piece may not be waiting to be found in the future, but has been quietly shaping the story all along, without anyone noticing. Captain John's name sits in One Piece history like a half-buried warning, mentioned just enough times to matter, but never explained enough to be understood. And that is exactly why the theory connecting him to the pirate crown jewel has become so dangerous in interpretation. The idea is simple on the surface. What if the crown jewel everyone is speculating about is actually Captain John's treasure? But once you sit with that thought, it starts to expand in uncomfortable directions. Because Captain John is not just some random pirate from the past. He is tied to the Rocks pirates, one of the most infamous and powerful crews to ever exist. A crew so chaotic and influential that even their existence feels like a scar in the world's recorded history. And when a character like John is positioned within that crew, anything connected to him automatically inherits weight. His treasure is not treated like ordinary loot in the story. It is repeatedly referenced, hinted at, and teased, yet never actually revealed in a satisfying way. That alone is unusual. In One Piece, most treasures either serve a narrative purpose or get resolved through discovery, but Captain John's remains in a state of permanent suggestion. It exists as a concept rather than an item, as if the story itself refuses to let it fully materialize. That kind of narrative treatment often signals that the object in question is not important for its value, but for its hidden function within the larger mystery of the world. The connection becomes even more compelling when you bring Chapter 1096 into the picture, where the Rock's pirates are shown more clearly than ever before. That chapter does something subtle but important. It confirms that the Rock's pirates were not just a rumor or exaggerated legend, but a real, structured, and deeply influential force operating in the world before the current era. Within that framework, Captain John is no longer just a background name. He becomes a verified participant in one of the most significant pirate organizations in history. And that changes the way his treasure must be interpreted. If John was part of Rocks, then anything he possessed, especially something labeled as a treasure, cannot be treated as ordinary. It must be assumed to have some connection, direct or indirect, to the larger ambitions or secrets of that crew. The Rock's pirates were not just seeking wealth. They were operating in a world still closer to the Void Century, still closer to truths that have since been erased or hidden. So, if Captain John's treasure is real, then it is not just gold or jewels. It is potentially a fragment of something much older, something tied to power structures the modern world is built upon. And yet, despite this implication, the treasure remains completely undefined. No clear description, no confirmed location, no revealed contents. Just silence wrapped around repeated mentions. That silence is not accidental. It feels engineered, as if the story is deliberately preventing the reader from anchoring it into something simple. Now this is where the theory takes a sharper turn. Because the more you examine Captain John's treasure, the more it begins to behave like the missing piece in a much larger puzzle that includes God Valley. The God Valley incident is already one of the most obscured events in the entire timeline, involving Rocks, Roger, Garp, and the world government in a chaotic convergence that reshaped history. And yet, within that chaos, there are inconsistencies. Objects moving without clear explanation, motivations that don't fully align, and outcomes that feel too clean for how violent the event is described to be. If Captain John's treasure was present at God Valley, then suddenly the entire incident gains an additional layer of meaning. It stops being just a battle over ideology and becomes a convergence point for something physical, something that multiple factions were unknowingly interacting with. And if that treasure was mislabeled, misidentified, or even deliberately disguised during the chaos, then it becomes possible that what people believed they were fighting for was not what they actually encountered. That opens the door to one of the most unsettling interpretations in the theory, that the crown jewel and Captain John's treasure are not separate mysteries, but the same object seen through different perspectives and corrupted historical records. One name surviving in pirate legend, the other surviving in fragmented theory space, both pointing toward a single unknown truth buried inside God Valley's erased narrative. And this is where Captain John's role becomes even stranger, because his treasure is not treated like a normal pirate hoard, even within in-universe references. It is constantly alluded to, but never resolved, almost as if it exists in a narrative holding pattern. That is rare in One Piece, where even minor mysteries eventually get a payoff or contextual closure. The fact that John's treasure continues to be referenced without resolution suggests it is not meant to function as a standalone prize, but as a connector object, something that links multiple arcs, eras, and characters together without revealing its true nature too early. And when you combine that with the Rock's Pirates' confirmed presence in Chapter 1096, the theory strengthens further. Because Rock's was not just a crew, it was a convergence of monsters, ambitions, and hidden agendas that directly challenged the world order. Anything within that crew that remains unresolved today is almost guaranteed to be tied to the foundation of the world's biggest secrets. So Captain John's treasure, by extension, stops being just his and starts feeling like something that was never truly his to begin with. Something passed through him, hidden within him, or temporarily stored through him until the moment it could re-enter the story at a later stage under a different name. And that name, according to the theory, is the crown jewel. And that leads directly into the most unsettling transition point in the entire idea. Because if Captain John's treasure truly is the crown jewel, or even just a fragment of it, then the implications go far beyond pirate history. It means the world government, the Rock's pirates, Roger's crew, and even the modern Yonko era may all be orbiting around the aftermath of a single misidentified object. It means God Valley wasn't just a battle. It was a confusion event, where the meaning of what was being fought over was lost in real time. And it means that everything built afterward, every legend, every pursuit of the One Piece, may have been influenced by a misunderstanding originating from that moment. Captain John's treasure, then, becomes more than a mystery item. It becomes a distortion point in history itself, a place where truth split into rumor, and rumor solidified into legend. And once you accept that possibility, the narrative stops feeling stable, because it suggests that the biggest secrets in One Piece are not hidden in the future waiting to be discovered, but are already embedded in the past, quietly misinterpreted for generations. And that's where things get strange. The Shanks swap theory pushes the entire God Valley mystery into a far more unsettling direction, because it reframes one of the most important figures in the modern era as something that may have been misidentified from the very beginning of the chaos. The core idea is deceptively simple. During the confusion of God Valley, a chest containing the infant Shanks was mistakenly treated as, or physically confused with, the so-called crown jewel, or a high-value treasure being transported across the battlefield. On the surface, it sounds like a coincidence born from chaos, but when you sit with it longer, it starts to feel less like a coincidence and more like structured misdirection. God Valley wasn't a normal battle. It was an event involving multiple top-tier forces, including the Rock's pirates, Roger's crew, and the world government, all converging under unclear objectives. In that kind of environment, information breaks down, labeling fails, and objects lose identity. A single chest becomes indistinguishable from another. And in that moment of total disorder, something as significant as a child hidden for protection could easily be mistaken for something far more valuable, especially if that child was already being transported under secrecy, sealed away in a way that made him indistinguishable from treasure storage. The theory suggests that Shanks was not just found in a chest by chance, but was part of a system of concealment that collided directly with the movement of actual high-value artifacts. That collision is where the error occurs, and where history begins to split into two conflicting narratives. The most important part of this theory is the implication that the Roger pirates did not intentionally take Shanks. They simply took the wrong object during the chaos. In a battlefield like God Valley, where even elite pirates and marines are scrambling for survival, recognition errors become not only possible but likely. A chest is a chest. Without proper context or labeling, its contents are unknown until opened, and by the time that realization happens, the action has already been committed. The idea that Roger's crew accidentally took Shanks reframes one of the most iconic figures in the series as someone whose journey began not with destiny, but with misdirection. It suggests that the future emperor of the Red Hair Pirates was not initially part of any grand design, but instead a byproduct of confusion in one of the most historically erased events in the world. And if that is true, then the emotional weight of Shanks' entire existence shifts dramatically, because it means his placement in Roger's hands was never the result of a deliberate rescue or selection. It was a consequence of mistaken identity at the highest level of historical chaos. And that mistake, once made, cannot be undone. It becomes embedded in the flow of history, shaping alliances, rivalries, and even the future Yonko structure, without anyone realizing the origin point was essentially an error in classification during a war. But the real twist comes when you consider what this implies about the crown jewel itself. If Shanks was in the chest that was taken, then the logical consequence is that the chest was not what it appeared to be. It was not simply a container for treasure. It was a decoy, a misdirection point, or an object that could easily be mistaken for something of immense value under battlefield conditions. That means the crown jewel, if it exists as a physical object, was never inside that chest in the first place. It was somewhere else entirely, potentially being moved, hidden, or secured by another faction during the same chaotic window of time. In other words, while Roger's crew walked away with something that would become one of the most important figures in the modern age, the actual object everyone believed they were chasing, the crown jewel, remained untouched, unclaimed, and unnoticed. That creates a split in the timeline of significance. One path leads to Shanks, unknowingly carried into destiny, and the other path leads to the real treasure, slipping through the cracks of history without anyone registering its escape. And that duality is what makes the theory so powerful. It suggests that God Valley did not produce a single outcome. It produced a divergence, where identity and value were separated and sent down completely different narrative trajectories. One became legend in human form, the other became myth in object form. And both are still influencing the world today, just in ways no one has fully connected yet. This is where the emotional and narrative tension of the theory becomes almost unavoidable, because it reframes the world government's entire reaction to God Valley as potentially built on incorrect assumptions. If they believed that Roger or another faction obtained the crown jewel during the chaos, then their subsequent actions, cover-ups, historical erasure, Suppression of information would have been directed at preventing the spread of knowledge about something that was never actually taken. In other words, the world government may have been chasing a ghost version of the truth, reacting to a misinterpreted outcome of the battle rather than the actual state of events. Meanwhile, the real crown jewel could have been quietly relocated, hidden, or even repurposed without ever triggering the global alarm that should have come with its movement. That creates a terrifying imbalance. The world's most powerful institution reacting to a false conclusion while the real variable continues to exist outside their awareness. And in parallel, Shanks, unintentionally placed into Roger's hands, grows into one of the most influential pirates in history, unknowingly shaped by an event that was never meant to define him. The chest becomes the pivot point of both misdirection and destiny. One outcome fuels global misunderstanding, the other produces a figure who will later influence the entire balance of power in the seas. And neither outcome aligns with what anyone originally intended during God Valley. That disconnect is where the theory gains its sharpest edge, because it suggests that history itself did not proceed correctly. It branched incorrectly due to a single moment of misidentification, and that leads directly into the most unsettling realization of all. If the world government was chasing the wrong thing, then everything built on that pursuit is also potentially flawed. Their suppression of information, their manipulation of historical records, and their fear of what was taken from God Valley may all be responses to an event that never actually happened in the way they believe it did. Meanwhile, the true crown jewel remains unaccounted for, possibly hidden in plain sight, while Shanks, carried away by mistake, becomes the unintended catalyst for future world-altering events. The chest did not deliver treasure to the pirates. It delivered a future emperor. And in doing so, it may have accidentally preserved the real treasure by diverting attention away from it entirely. Because while everyone focused on what they thought was inside that chest, no one questioned what was left behind. And what was left behind may be the most important object in the entire world, meaning the world government was chasing the wrong thing. The idea that the world government targeted Roger so intensely after God Valley takes on a completely different meaning when you apply the crown jewel theory, because it reframes Roger not just as a pirate who defied authority, but as someone mistakenly believed to have taken something far more important than he actually did. In this interpretation, Roger becomes the center of a historical misunderstanding so large that it shaped the direction of the entire world's power structure. The world government, already operating in secrecy and control, would have had every reason to react aggressively if they believed the crown jewel had been stolen during the chaos of God Valley. A treasure tied to the Rock's pirates, potentially linked to the foundations of the world's hidden history, would not just be valuable, it would be existentially dangerous to them. So when Roger emerges from that incident alive, strengthened, and increasingly influential, it becomes easy for the world government to assign him the role of primary suspect. In their eyes, he is no longer just a rising pirate. He is the man who possibly walked away with the one thing that could destabilize everything they control. And that assumption alone is enough to justify an unprecedented level of pursuit, suppression, and historical rewriting. Because once you believe Roger holds the crown jewel, every move he makes becomes a threat to global stability. Every crew he forms, every island he visits, every secret he uncovers becomes part of a larger fear. that he is slowly unraveling something that should never be revealed. This is where the intensity of the God Valley aftermath begins to make more sense under the theory. The world government's response to Roger is not proportional to piracy alone. It feels like a reaction to something far more specific, almost surgical in its precision. Pirates come and go throughout history, but Roger's era is treated differently, almost as if he represents a breaking point. If the crown jewel was believed to be in his possession, then that would explain why he becomes the central figure of global concern rather than just another dangerous pirate. It also explains why so much effort is invested in controlling information about him, his journey, and ultimately Laugh-Tale itself. Because in this scenario, Laugh-Tale is not just a destination, it becomes a verification point. If Roger reaches it, then whatever he knows or carries could validate or invalidate the world government's assumptions about the crown jewel. That transforms his voyage from a personal ambition into a geopolitical threat. Every step he takes across the Grand Line becomes a potential confirmation that the world government is either right or catastrophically wrong about what happened at God Valley. And that uncertainty is far more dangerous than the truth itself. So their pursuit of Roger is not just punishment, it is containment. Containment of information, of possibility, and of the fear that their understanding of the crown jewel is already based on a mistake that cannot be corrected once exposed. But the most interesting contradiction in this theory is that while Roger is being pursued under the assumption that he stole the crown jewel, the real treasure remains completely outside of that narrative loop. It is not actively being searched for in the same way because attention has been diverted. The entire world's focus shifts toward Roger as the supposed carrier of the missing piece, while the actual object of importance slips further into obscurity. This creates a powerful illusion of resolution. Everyone believes the mystery is contained within Roger's journey, when in reality, the true mystery has already moved beyond him. The crown jewel, under this interpretation, becomes something almost invisible in plain sight. It is not hidden because it is deeply buried or locked away. It is hidden because the world has collectively agreed, incorrectly, on where it should be. And once that consensus is formed, even the most powerful institutions stop questioning it. The world government begins reacting to Roger as if he is the end point of the problem, not realizing that he may only be a distraction from it. Meanwhile, the actual treasure remains untouched, possibly still within the same world structure it originated from, quietly existing without triggering the global alarm that should have followed its disappearance. That imbalance between perception and reality is what makes the theory so compelling. It suggests that the greatest deception in One Piece history is not concealment, but misdirection on a global scale. And this is where Roger himself becomes a far more tragic and ironic figure within the theory. If he was pursued under the belief that he stole the crown jewel, then much of his journey could be interpreted as a response to accusations that were never actually accurate. His rise to Pirate King status, his discovery of the truth of the world, and his final voyage to Laugh-Tale may all have been influenced by a misunderstanding placed on him by the world government's flawed interpretation of God Valley. In that sense, Roger is not just challenging the world, he is being shaped by it, reacting to the wrong assumption. Every step he takes is amplified by a pressure built on incorrect information, forcing him into a role that may not have originally belonged to him. And yet, paradoxically, That misunderstanding is what elevates him into legend. Without being falsely positioned as the thief of the crown jewel, he may never have been pursued so intensely, never been pushed so far, and never uncovered the deeper truths of the world. The irony is that the world government's mistake may have created the very legend they feared. Meanwhile, the real crown jewel continues to exist outside this feedback loop, untouched by Roger's journey, unaffected by the global obsession surrounding him. It becomes a silent constant in the background of history, present, real, and dangerously ignored because everyone is looking in the wrong direction. And that leads to the most critical turning point in this entire section. If Roger was targeted under false assumptions, and if the crown jewel was never actually in his possession, then the question shifts from who took it to something far more unsettling. Who knew it was never taken in the first place? Because in a world filled with intelligence networks, ancient knowledge, and hidden factions, it is unlikely that only one side misinterpreted God Valley. Someone else may have understood the truth immediately, that the crown jewel was never on Roger's ship, never part of his crew, and never part of his destiny at that moment. And that raises the possibility that while the world government was chasing Roger across the seas, believing they were recovering or suppressing a stolen truth, another party was quietly aware that the real object of interest had never moved at all. It remained exactly where it was supposed to be, hidden not by distance or secrecy, but by assumption. And that realization shifts the entire narrative into a darker direction. Because if someone knew exactly where the crown jewel actually was, and allowed the world to chase Roger instead, then the entire post-God Valley era may have been built on intentional misdirection rather than accidental misunderstanding. And that is where everything begins to converge toward a far more dangerous idea. And someone else knew exactly where it was. Luffy and the strange armband tied to Captain John is one of those details in One Piece that looks completely harmless on the surface, but becomes far more suspicious the longer you sit with it. At first glance, it is nothing more than a discarded relic from a forgotten pirate, an accessory that carries no obvious value, no shining gems, no clear technological function, and no immediate narrative weight that screams important artifact. And yet, despite that, Luffy chooses to keep it. Not because he understands its significance, not because it is presented to him as something powerful, and not even because it is tied to any immediate goal. He keeps it in the most Luffy-like way possible, casual, instinctive, almost absent-minded. But in One Piece, moments like that are never truly meaningless. When a character like Luffy, who instinctively gravitates toward freedom, food, and people rather than objects or wealth, chooses to retain something so specific, it immediately creates narrative tension. Because Luffy does not collect things for symbolism. He keeps things that feel right in a way he cannot explain. And that makes the armband strange. It is not presented as a treasure. It is not framed as a weapon. It is not even treated by the world around him as something worth stealing or protecting. It is just there. And that just there quality is exactly what makes it suspicious in a story where almost nothing exists without purpose. The connection to Captain John makes the object even more interesting, because it ties a seemingly irrelevant item to one of the most obscure yet thematically loaded figures from the Rocks Pirates era. Captain John's legacy is already wrapped in mystery, particularly his obsession with treasure that was never fully explained or revealed in a satisfying way. So when an item associated with him ends up in Luffy's possession, even indirectly, it raises immediate questions about narrative intent. Why this object? Why now? And why Luffy? The armband itself does not behave like a conventional treasure item. It does not emit power, it does not react to haki, and it does not visibly influence events in a direct, measurable way. Instead, it exists as a passive artifact, something that moves through the story without drawing attention to itself while still refusing to be discarded entirely. That is the key detail. Because in One Piece, truly irrelevant objects are usually forgotten quickly or used for comedic disposal. But this armband lingers. It passes through Luffy's possession without being treated as trash, and without being elevated into something obviously important. It sits in a narrative middle ground, which is often where the most important secrets are hidden. And when you combine that with the broader crown jewel theory, the armband stops looking like a random accessory and starts feeling like a marker, something that subtly connects Luffy to a chain of events that predates his awareness of the world's deeper structure. What makes this even more compelling is the fact that the armband holds no visible value. There are no embedded jewels, no ancient inscriptions that immediately signal importance, no technological enhancement that would suggest advanced origin. By normal storytelling logic, it should be dismissed instantly. But instead, it persists in the narrative orbit around Luffy, almost as if its value is not meant to be visual at all, but conceptual. That shifts the interpretation from object of power to object of function. In other words, the armband may not be valuable because of what it is, but because of what it represents or connects to. This is where the theory begins to overlap with the idea of misdirection established in earlier sections. If the crown jewel was never a simple treasure, but rather a misidentified or fragmented object tied to God Valley, then items like Captain John's armband could function as secondary anchors, pieces that do not look important individually but collectively point towards something larger. Luffy keeping it becomes more than a character quirk. It becomes a narrative alignment. He is not consciously following a trail, but the story is placing him along one. And that distinction is critical because it reinforces a pattern in One Piece where destiny is not always loud or obvious. Sometimes it is embedded in small decisions that characters themselves do not recognize as meaningful at the time. The armband, in this sense, is not a reward. It is a placement. The moment the armband is later traded or passed forward, particularly in its interaction with Buggy, it adds another layer of complexity to its function. It does not remain anchored to Luffy as a permanent possession, which prevents it from becoming a static power item. Instead, it moves through the world, almost like a tracking device embedded in narrative flow rather than physical mechanics. And that movement is what makes it unsettling under the crown jewel framework. Because if Captain John's treasure is connected to misdirection at God Valley, and if objects associated with him continue to circulate without a clear explanation, then it suggests that the true importance of these items is not their ownership, but their trajectory. Where they go, who they pass through, and how they subtly influence the behavior of those who carry them may matter more than what they physically are. Luffy's brief possession of the armband, therefore, becomes part of a larger, invisible chain of interactions that the story does not explicitly label but consistently maintains. And in that chain, nothing feels random anymore. Even decisions that appear comedic or spontaneous begin to look like structural placements in a much larger design. The armband does not need to reveal power to be significant. It only needs to exist in the right hands at the right moment, even if those hands do not realize what they are holding. And this leads directly into the most important implication of this section. Luffy's interaction with the armband is not about understanding. It is about positioning. He does not recognize it as valuable, and that is exactly what makes it dangerous in narrative terms. Because in a world where the crown jewel may already be hidden through misinterpretation and historical confusion, objects that pass through Luffy's hands without being recognized could be functioning as blind markers for something far greater. The armband becomes a symbol of unnoticed alignment, a piece of a puzzle that only makes sense when viewed in hindsight. And if Luffy is unknowingly interacting with fragments of a larger mystery tied to Captain John, God Valley, and the crown jewel, then his journey is already entangled with it at a level beneath conscious awareness. That means every decision involving such objects is not just character-driven, it is structurally significant. And that is where the tension peaks. Because if Luffy is already carrying or interacting with elements of the crown jewel mystery without realizing it, then the line between accidental involvement and destined convergence begins to blur completely. And what Luffy did with it changes everything. Buggy's hidden role in the armband theory becomes far more interesting when you stop treating him as comic relief and start viewing him as an accidental constant in major historical events. Because in One Piece, Buggy is not just a gag character who fails upward. He is someone who repeatedly appears at the exact intersection of world-changing moments without ever fully understanding what he is standing on. So when Luffy ends up giving him Captain John's armband, it doesn't just feel like a random trade or comedic exchange. It feels like a transfer of narrative weight from one unaware carrier to another. Luffy, who instinctively attracts important people and objects without fully recognizing their significance, passes the item to Buggy, a man whose entire identity is built around an obsession with treasure, status, and the idea of becoming something greater than what he actually is. That combination alone creates an unusual dynamic, because Buggy is not indifferent to treasure like Luffy. He is actively consumed by it. He chases it, fantasizes about it, and builds his entire identity around the pursuit of it, even when reality consistently humiliates him. So, when he receives an object tied to Captain John, a member of the Rock's pirates, it doesn't land as meaningless in his world. It immediately becomes something worth interpreting, protecting, and potentially exploiting. And that is where the theory begins to shift, because Buggy is not just holding the armband. He is the first character in this chain who would actively try to understand it. From a narrative perspective, Buggy's obsession with treasure makes him uniquely positioned to interact with objects that others dismiss. While Luffy sees the armband as something to carry without thought and most other characters would likely ignore it due to lack of obvious value, Buggy's mindset forces him to assign meaning even when none is clearly visible. That is important, because it introduces the idea that the armband may function less like a traditional treasure and more like a trigger object, something that gains significance through interpretation rather than appearance. If Captain John's treasure and the crown jewel are part of a misdirection network tied to God Valley, then objects associated with that system would not need to be visually impressive to be meaningful. Instead, their importance could be embedded in their connections, their origins, or their proximity to key individuals. Buggy, unknowingly, becomes a perfect candidate for interacting with such a system because he is both greedy enough to pursue meaning and chaotic enough to move through the world unpredictably. And in doing so, he may be following a path that was never intended to be visible in a linear way. Every time Buggy mistakes coincidence for destiny or failure for opportunity, he is actually shifting himself closer to the center of events he does not understand. The armband, in this interpretation, is not just a relic, it is a breadcrumb. And Buggy, through his obsession, becomes the first person willing to follow breadcrumbs that others don't even acknowledge exist. What makes this even more compelling is the idea that Buggy could be unintentionally approaching Pirate King-level significance without ever realizing it. On the surface, this sounds absurd, because Buggy is constantly framed as someone who fails upward rather than someone who progresses through competence or understanding. But One Piece has repeatedly shown that status in the pirate world is not always determined by strength alone. It is also determined by perception, timing, and proximity to truth. Buggy consistently finds himself in situations where he is misidentified, overestimated, or placed into positions far beyond his actual capabilities. And yet, those misunderstandings often produce real consequences in the world. So, when he receives something potentially tied to Captain John's treasure, and by extension the crown jewel theory, he becomes a wild card in a system that depends heavily on controlled information. If the armband functions as a locator or symbolic key, even in a metaphorical sense, then Buggy carrying it means the object is now in the hands of someone who will actively move through the world chasing treasure-related opportunities. That movement alone could unknowingly bring him closer to locations, factions, or events tied to the deeper mystery. He does not need to understand the system to interact with it. He only needs to keep moving toward his own interpretation of treasure, and in doing so, he may be aligning himself with the hidden structure of the world more accurately than characters who are consciously searching for truth. That is the irony of Buggy's role. His ignorance does not remove him from the system, it embeds him inside it. And this is where the theory begins to tighten around a more unsettling idea. Buggy's presence in this chain may not be accidental at all. If Luffy is unknowingly positioned as a central figure in the crown jewel narrative due to his connection with objects like the armband, and if Captain John's legacy is tied to misdirection originating from God Valley, then Buggy's repeated encounters with high-level historical artifacts and events begin to look less like a coincidence and more like a structured placement. The armband becomes a transitional object, moving from Luffy's instinctive possession to Buggy's obsessive interpretation, effectively passing from unconscious significance to conscious obsession. That shift is important because it means the object is now being actively read by someone who will project meaning onto it, potentially distorting or revealing its purpose in ways neither Luffy nor the original system intended. Buggy's misunderstanding becomes a tool. Every incorrect assumption he makes could still lead him toward real outcomes, because the system he is interacting with is already built on misidentification and fragmented history. In that sense, Buggy is not just holding an object. He is interacting with a broken information network where even wrong conclusions can produce correct positioning. And that is what makes him dangerous in a narrative sense. Not because he understands the truth, but because he doesn't need to. He only needs to act on his version of it. And that leads to the central question that now emerges from this entire chain of events. If Luffy passed the armband to Buggy, and Buggy's obsession with treasure turns every object into a potential path forward, then where does this treasure actually lead? Because at this point, It is no longer just about Captain John, or God Valley, or even the crown jewel as an isolated mystery. It becomes about the direction these objects create as they move through different hands, each interpretation adding distortion but also momentum. Buggy may not realize it, but his pursuit of treasure could be aligning him with a route that intersects with the deepest secrets of the world, simply because he refuses to ignore anything that might have value. And in a world where value is often hidden behind layers of misdirection, that mindset becomes unexpectedly effective. The armband does not need to explicitly point to anything. It only needs to exist long enough for someone like Buggy to project ambition onto it. And once that happens, the path is already forming beneath his feet. Not because he understands it, but because he cannot stop chasing it. And that raises the question that everything else now depends on. But where does this treasure actually lead? The idea that the crown jewel, or Captain John's treasure, depending on which layer of the theory you follow, is hidden beneath a skull island, immediately shifts the mystery into something far more grounded in one-piece geography, yet far more symbolic in meaning. Because Skull Island is not just a location, it is a pattern, a motif that repeats in different forms across the world, most notably in places like Hachinosu and Onigashima, both of which carry that same visual and thematic weight of death, piracy, and buried history. And when you start connecting those dots, the theory stops feeling like a single hidden treasure and starts feeling like a distributed secret, something split across locations that all represent different aspects of the same underlying truth. Hachinosu, known as the Pirate Island, already stands as a convergence point for criminals, forgotten histories, and power structures that exist outside normal governance. It is a place where the world's discarded elements gather, which makes it an ideal candidate for something like the crown jewel to be hidden beneath it. On the other hand, Onigashima carries its own symbolic burden, tied to ancient wars, Oni imagery, and Kaido's regime built on domination and legacy distortion. Both islands share more than aesthetics. They share narrative roles as repositories of violence, erased history, and concentrated ambition. So when the theory suggests that the treasure is hidden under Skull Island, it is not pointing to a single fixed location. It is pointing to a category of locations, places where the world's truth is buried under layers of chaos, myth, and controlled history. What makes this even more compelling is how naturally Kaido fits into this framework, even without explicit confirmation. Kaido's obsession with war, history, and ultimate power aligns perfectly with the idea of a hidden object that represents a missing piece of the world's foundation. He is not just a conqueror. He is someone who actively tries to force the world into revealing its true nature through conflict. If the crown jewel is tied to God Valley, and potentially to the Rock's pirates, then Kaido's presence in the narrative becomes more than just a thematic coincidence. He becomes someone orbiting the gravitational pull of an ancient secret he may not fully understand, but instinctively recognizes as important. His interest in Wano, a country already deeply tied to ancient weapons and historical suppression, further strengthens this idea. Wano itself sits at the intersection of isolation and buried technology, which already connects it to the broader theme of hidden world-changing artifacts. If Onigashima represents Kaido's attempt to build a kingdom on top of chaos, then the possibility that something like the crown jewel, or something related to it, is buried beneath that structure adds another layer of irony. Kaido builds his empire on top of a foundation he does not fully control, possibly sitting directly above something that predates his ambitions entirely. That creates a dynamic where power is not built upward. It is unknowingly stacked on top of something ancient and unresolved. Then there is Hachinosu, which introduces an entirely different angle to the Skull Island concept. Unlike Onigashima, which is ruled by a single dominant force, Hachinosu is chaotic by design. It is a pirate haven, a place where structure is minimal and ambition is unchecked. That makes it an ideal hiding place for anything that requires misdirection rather than protection. If the crown jewel was never meant to be found through strength alone, but through confusion, displacement, and misinterpretation, then Hachinosu becomes a perfect candidate for concealment. It is not hidden because it is locked away. It is hidden because it is surrounded by too much noise. In such an environment, even something extremely important can blend into the background of constant piracy, shifting alliances, and overlapping ambitions. And this is where the theory becomes more layered. Hachinosu is not just a possible location for the treasure. It is a mechanism of concealment itself, a place where truth becomes indistinguishable from rumor. That means the crown jewel, if it is connected to Captain John and the Rock's pirates, may not be buried in a physical sense, but buried in narrative chaos. It is not hidden underground. It is hidden under interpretation. And Skull Island, whether represented by Hachinosu or Onigashima, becomes a symbolic structure for that exact type of concealment. Layered history built on top of unresolved violence and competing claims to truth. The connection to ancient weapons like Pluton and broader Joy Boy mythology pushes this theory into even deeper territory. Because once you start placing the crown jewel beneath these Skull Islands, it stops being just a pirate treasure and starts resembling a structural key to the world itself. Pluton, hidden in Wano, already represents the idea that the world contains buried weapons capable of reshaping geography and power balances. If Skull Islands are similarly layered with hidden significance, then it is possible that they are not just hiding treasure, but fragments of a larger system of ancient knowledge or power distribution. Joy Boy's legacy, which is already tied to promises, failed alliances, and world-altering intentions, fits naturally into this framework. The crown jewel could represent a missing component of that legacy, not necessarily a weapon, but a catalyst or symbolic anchor that ties different ancient systems together. That would explain why it is so difficult to define. It is not meant to function as a standalone object. It is meant to complete a relationship between other hidden elements. And Kaido's interest, whether direct or indirect, becomes more significant in that context, because he is one of the few characters actively trying to engage with the idea of ultimate truth through power, even if he does not articulate it in those terms. If he is positioned near or above something connected to Joy Boy or Pluton, then his entire worldview is built on top of an incomplete understanding of the forces beneath him. And this is where everything begins to converge into a much larger idea that stretches beyond individual characters or islands. Because if Skull Islands like Hachinosu and Onigashima are not just locations but layers in a global concealment structure, then the crown jewel is not just hidden. It is embedded within a system of misdirection that spans geography, history, and ideology. It is not located in one place waiting to be found. It is distributed across multiple symbolic points that only make sense when viewed together. Kaido's presence, the Rock's pirate's legacy, the chaos of Hachinosu, and the structured brutality of Onigashima all become fragments of the same buried mechanism. And once you see that pattern, the implication becomes unavoidable. The treasure is not simply under Skull Island. It is part of what makes Skull Island significant in the first place. And that connects this entire mystery to something much bigger. The idea that the crown jewel may have been bait during the God Valley incident completely changes the emotional and strategic foundation of that entire historical event, because it reframes one of the most chaotic battles in One Piece history, not as a spontaneous clash of power, but as something far more controlled and deliberate. Instead of pirates and marines colliding randomly over conflicting interests, this theory suggests that both sides were deliberately drawn into the same location under the influence of a hidden catalyst, something valuable enough to attract legends like Roger, Garp, and Rocks simultaneously. And if that catalyst was the crown jewel, then its role was never simply to be stolen or protected, but to function as a gravitational point for the most dangerous individuals of that era. That immediately raises a disturbing possibility. God Valley may not have been an accident of history, but a carefully engineered convergence. A stage set in motion long before the battle began, where the most powerful forces in the world were guided into collision under the illusion of independent motivation. The crown jewel, in this interpretation, is not just a treasure, it is a trigger. Something designed, or at least exploited, to draw attention away from whatever the true objective of God Valley actually was. Because in a world where information is tightly controlled and history is actively rewritten, even a single misleading object can redirect the actions of entire fleets and pirate crews. And that is exactly what makes the idea of bait so dangerous. It implies that everyone present believed they were acting freely, when in reality, they were responding to a carefully constructed illusion. When you examine the participants of God Valley through this lens, the structure becomes even more suspicious. The Rock's pirates, arguably the most unstable and powerful pirate crew of their time, were already moving in a way that threatened global stability. Roger's crew was rising as a counterforce to that chaos, while Garp represented the institutional strength of the Marines. Bringing all three forces together in a single isolated location already stretches probability, but when you introduce the idea of a bait object like the crown jewel, the convergence starts to look engineered rather than coincidental. It suggests that someone, somewhere, understood how to manipulate ambition itself, how to position an object of enough perceived value to draw in multiple competing ideologies without revealing the true reason behind their convergence. Pirates believe they are chasing treasure. Marines believe they are stopping chaos. The world government believes it is maintaining order. But if all of them were responding to the same hidden signal, then their motivations become secondary to the design of the event itself. The crown jewel, in that case, is not important because of what it is. It is important because of what it causes. It creates motion. It creates conflict. It creates justification. And in doing so, it becomes the perfect tool for shaping outcomes without ever directly revealing intent. God Valley stops being a battlefield over a treasure and becomes a controlled collapse point, where multiple forces are allowed to intersect under the illusion of spontaneity. This naturally leads to the idea that there may have been a larger mastermind behind the entire setup, someone, or something, operating at a level above the known factions of that era. Because coordinating an event like God Valley, even indirectly, would require an understanding of how each major player would respond to specific stimuli. Pirates do not move like soldiers. Marines do not act like independent agents. And yet, all of them arrived at the same place at the same time, driven by motivations that seem individually reasonable but collectively impossible to synchronize without intervention. That intervention, according to the theory, could have been the strategic placement or manipulation of the crown jewel narrative itself. If rumors about the treasure were allowed, or engineered, to spread in a controlled way, then it would function as a universal attractor, pulling in every major faction with something to gain or something to prevent. Rox might see it as ultimate power. Roger might see it as a discovery or freedom. The Marines might see it as containment of a global threat. And the world government might see it as a critical object tied to ancient secrets that must never resurface. Each interpretation would be different, but the result would be the same: convergence. And once convergence is achieved, control over the battlefield becomes secondary to control over the setup. That is the essence of bait, not forcing actions directly, but creating conditions where actions become inevitable. In that sense, the crown jewel is not just a passive object in this theory. It becomes an active mechanism of historical manipulation. Whether physical or conceptual, it functions as a catalyst that ensures God Valley unfolds in a specific direction, even if none of the participants fully understand why they are there. What makes this idea even more unsettling is the implication that the true purpose of God Valley may have had nothing to do with piracy at all. If the crown jewel was bait, then the battle itself may have been a cover for something far more significant, an operation hidden beneath layers of conflict and chaos. The presence of figures like Rox, Roger, and Garp could have been necessary distractions rather than primary targets. Each faction becomes a piece in a larger concealment strategy, where their conflict masks the movement or protection of something far more important happening off-screen. That raises the possibility that while everyone was focused on fighting over or reacting to the crown jewel, the real objective of the event was being completed elsewhere on the island, unnoticed. The treasure becomes a narrative spotlight, deliberately placed to draw attention away from whatever was truly being moved, hidden, or erased during the incident. And in that sense, even the most powerful figures in history are reduced to participants in a controlled distraction. They are not the center of God Valley. They are the noise covering the center. That reframes the entire event as less of a battle and more of a misdirection operation on a global scale. And if that is true, then the crown jewel is not just a piece of the puzzle. It is the reason the puzzle was never meant to be solved in the first place. And this leads directly into the most important implication of all. If God Valley was set up around bait, then someone must have understood the full scope of what that bait would produce. Because creating a convergence of that magnitude is not something that happens without awareness of consequences. It implies foresight, planning, or at the very least, deep exploitation of existing ambitions and rivalries. And that means the crown jewel theory does not end with the object itself. It ends with the question of authorship. Who structured the conditions that allowed such a convergence to occur? Who understood enough about pirates, marines, and hidden history to position a single point of interest that could draw them all in? And more importantly, what was meant to be achieved once they arrived? Because if God Valley was not just a battle but a setup, then the crown jewel is only the surface layer of a much deeper design. It is the visible excuse for invisible actions, the bait that explains the hook but not the fisherman, and that realization leads directly into the next unanswered question. And that leads to one of the biggest mysteries. The relationship between Garp and Xebec becomes far more unsettling when you stop viewing them as simple opposites, marine hero versus pirate tyrant, and start noticing how many structural similarities exist between them beneath the surface narrative. On paper, they are framed as ideological enemies, destined to clash during one of the most infamous events in One Piece history, God Valley. Garp represents the Marines, justice, and institutional order, while Xebec represents chaos, rebellion, and the ambition to overthrow the world itself. But the more you examine their roles, the more that clean contrast begins to blur. Because both figures exist outside normal categorization. Garp, despite being a Marine, consistently rejects promotion and authority, acting more like a rogue force within the system than a loyal soldier of it. Xebec, despite being a pirate, is not driven by simple greed or freedom, but by a larger ideological ambition that seems to aim at the world government itself. In that sense, both men occupy a space between systems rather than fully belonging to either side. They are not pure opposites, they are mirror distortions, each challenging the structure they are supposedly part of. And that immediately raises suspicion, because in One Piece, mirrored characters often indicate hidden thematic or narrative connections that go far beyond surface conflict. When you start breaking down their traits, the parallels become even harder to dismiss. Both Garp and Xebec are surrounded by legends that feel slightly incomplete, as if the full truth of their actions has been filtered through layers of narrative control. Garp is credited as the hero of the Marines after God Valley, yet the exact nature of that heroism is never fully detailed in a way that resolves all inconsistencies. Xebec, on the other hand, is presented as one of the most dangerous figures in history, yet very little is concretely known about his true goals, methods, or even his full capabilities. Both characters are defined as much by the absence of information as by the presence of action. That alone creates a structural symmetry. One is remembered as the hero of a battle that is poorly documented, the other as the villain of the same battle whose motivations are equally obscured. Even their narrative weight feels balanced in a way that suggests intentional design. Neither is allowed full clarity, because full clarity would collapse the mystery of God Valley itself. And when two opposing figures are both withheld from complete explanation, it creates space for something else to exist between them, a hidden truth that is not fully assigned to either side. That space is where theories begin to form, because it suggests that the battle between Garp and Xebec may not have been a simple clash of good and evil, but something more complex that history has deliberately simplified. This is where the symbolism becomes even more intriguing, because both Garp and Xebec are associated with concepts that extend beyond their immediate roles. Garp is tied to will, discipline, and the idea of inherited justice, but he constantly resists the system that claims to embody those values. Xebec, meanwhile, is tied to ambition, conquest, and the idea of world domination, but his existence is fragmented, as if even his ideology has been partially erased or rewritten. Both figures seem to represent extremes of the same underlying concept. the refusal to accept the world as it is. One works within the system while resisting it from inside. The other works against it from outside while trying to destroy it entirely. But neither fits cleanly into their assigned role. That overlap creates a disturbing possibility. What if their opposition was not purely ideological, but structurally necessary? In other words, what if Garp and Xebec were positioned as counterweights in a larger system designed to stabilize world conflict rather than resolve it? If God Valley was indeed a setup involving bait like the crown jewel, then the presence of both Garp and Xebec at the center of it could have been intentional, not just as combatants, but as symbolic anchors for opposing forces. Their conflict would then serve a purpose beyond victory or defeat. It would define the narrative outcome of the event itself, shaping how history would later interpret what happened. And if that interpretation was controlled or influenced, then the true nature of their encounter may never have been fully recorded. Instead, what survives is a simplified version. Hero defeats villain. Order defeats chaos. Marine triumphs over pirate threat. But beneath that simplicity may lie a far more complicated interaction that history was not allowed to preserve. The most unsettling implication of all this is the possibility that Garp and Xebec are not just parallel figures, but connected in a way that has been deliberately obscured. Their similarities are not just thematic, they feel structural. Both are tied to God Valley. Both exist at the intersection of major world forces. Both are surrounded by incomplete historical data. And both are referenced in ways that suggest their full stories extend beyond what is officially acknowledged. In a narrative as carefully constructed as One Piece, this level of mirrored ambiguity rarely happens by accident. It suggests that their roles in God Valley may not have been fully independent. Instead, they may have been operating within a shared system of events that neither fully controlled or understood. If the crown jewel functioned as bait, drawing multiple factions into the same location, then Garp and Xebec may have been two critical components of that convergence, not just reacting to the situation, but structurally necessary for it to reach its intended outcome. That does not necessarily mean they were allies or conspirators, but it raises the possibility that their clash was part of a larger mechanism rather than a purely organic conflict. And if that is true, then the boundary between hero and villain becomes far less stable than the official narrative suggests. And this brings everything to a sharper and more uncomfortable realization. If Garp and Xebec are more alike than different, then the story of God Valley cannot be understood through simple opposition alone. Their similarities begin to suggest that they are both reflections of a deeper system that governs how power, conflict, and history are structured in the world. And if that system was activated or influenced by something like the crown jewel, then their encounter was not just inevitable, it was engineered in some form, whether directly or indirectly. That would mean the legendary clash that defined an era was not just the result of two opposing ideologies colliding, but the product of a much larger design that used both men as instruments of outcome. And once you reach that point, the question is no longer about who won or lost. It becomes about why their roles were written the way they were in the first place, because their similarities are almost impossible to ignore. Garp's mystery deepens the more you look at him, especially when you start focusing on the inconsistencies that the story never fully addresses, like his scar appearing and disappearing in different depictions and timelines. On the surface, This could be dismissed as a minor art variation or storytelling inconsistency, but in a series as detail-conscious as One Piece, repeated visual contradictions around a major figure tend to feel intentional rather than accidental. Garp is not a background character. He is one of the most influential Marines in history, directly tied to Roger, Dragon, Ace, Luffy, and the God Valley incident itself. So when something as simple as a scar does not remain consistent across portrayals, it starts to feel symbolic rather than cosmetic. A scar is supposed to represent permanence, a mark of history that cannot be erased. Yet in Garp's case, that permanence seems unstable. That instability opens the door to interpretation. What if Garp's identity itself is not as fixed as the world believes? What if the inconsistencies are not errors, but subtle signals that there is more than one version of Garp being remembered, recorded, or even perceived? In a world where history is already manipulated and rewritten, even small visual contradictions begin to feel like intentional clues pointing toward deeper uncertainty. This idea becomes more unsettling when you start considering the duality in Garp's behavior and personality, which often feels like it exists in tension with itself. He is known as the hero of the Marines, yet he repeatedly refuses promotion and authority, choosing instead to operate on the edges of the system rather than fully embodying it. He enforces Marine justice, but often does so in ways that feel personal, emotional, or even contradictory to strict institutional logic. At times, he behaves less like a symbol of Marine order and more like a man who simply chose a side long ago, without fully erasing the instincts or tendencies of the other side he might have belonged to. This creates a strange psychological layering. Garp is both inside the system and resistant to it, both celebrated by it and slightly disconnected from it. That tension feeds into the idea of dual personality hints, not necessarily in a literal sense, but in the way his character seems to contain conflicting interpretations of justice and identity. One version of Garp is the unwavering Marine hero who defeated legends and upheld order. Another version feels closer to someone who understands pirates too well, who laughs too freely, who connects too easily with figures like Roger and even Luffy. That familiarity is not typical of strict institutional loyalty. It feels almost like recognition between equals rather than enforcement from authority. And that raises the question of whether Garp's identity is purely singular, or whether it has been shaped by experiences or events that split how he is perceived across different narratives. Even more compelling is the way Garp's so-called pirate-like traits constantly leak through his Marine identity, creating an uncomfortable overlap that the story never fully resolves. He eats and behaves with a lack of discipline that contrasts sharply with most high-ranking Marines. He shows emotional attachment to figures that should technically be his enemies, and he operates with a level of independence that feels closer to pirate freedom than Marine structure. His training methods are brutal but unorthodox. His decisions often prioritize personal judgment over institutional protocol, and his humor and personality frequently align more with pirate crews than Marine command structures. This does not make him a pirate, but it does make him difficult to categorize cleanly. And in One Piece, characters who resist categorization often end up tied to deeper thematic roles than their titles suggest. Garp's existence challenges the binary structure of Marine versus pirate, order versus chaos, law versus freedom. He sits directly in the contradiction, embodying elements of both while officially belonging to only one. That contradiction becomes especially important when viewed alongside theories involving God Valley, the crown jewel, and manipulated historical events. Because if Garp is not fully aligned with the identity the world assigns him, then his role in those events may also be more complex than the simplified historical record suggests. The possibility arises that Garp is not just a participant in history, but a figure whose identity has been partially shaped or partially obscured by how that history was recorded. And this is where everything begins to feel even more unstable. Because if Garp's visual inconsistencies, personality duality, and behavioral contradictions are all part of a larger pattern, then the question becomes whether he is simply a complex character, or something closer to a fragmented narrative representation of a deeper truth. In a world where history is selectively erased and rewritten, identity itself becomes vulnerable to distortion. A figure like Garp, who exists at the center of one of the most heavily obscured events in history, becomes a prime candidate for that distortion. The scar that appears and disappears is no longer just a visual detail, it becomes a metaphor for incomplete memory. The dual personality hints are no longer just character nuance. They become signs of conflicting interpretations of the same individual. And the pirate-like traits are no longer quirks. They become evidence of overlap between systems that are supposed to be separate. This does not necessarily mean Garp is literally two people or hiding a split identity, but it does suggest that the way he is understood may be incomplete. That his true role in events like God Valley, especially in relation to theories like the crown jewel setup, may not be fully captured by the official narrative. Instead, he may represent a point where multiple versions of history intersect, creating contradictions that cannot be fully resolved within a single interpretation. And that leads directly into the most unsettling direction this line of thought can take. Because once you accept that Garp's identity may be partially unstable in how it is represented, the implications extend beyond him as an individual and into the structure of the entire historical record. It suggests that what the world believes about God Valley, about Roger, about Xebec, and even about the crown jewel itself may all be filtered through similar layers of inconsistency and selective memory. Garp, standing at the center of that event, becomes less of a fixed point and more of a distorted lens through which history has been viewed. And if the lens itself is unstable, then everything seen through it becomes questionable. That realization makes his mystery even more unsettling. Xebec's connection to the larger mystery of One Piece becomes far more unsettling when you start analyzing his leadership style and comparing it to figures like Luffy, because the similarities are not just superficial, they feel structural, almost like echoes of the same kind of will expressed through completely different eras and circumstances. Rox D. Xebec is often described as a tyrannical, world-threatening pirate captain, but the limited information we have about him paints a strangely incomplete picture. He is remembered as someone who gathered some of the most dangerous individuals in history under one banner, not through harmony or loyalty, but through sheer force of ambition and personality. And yet, the way his crew is described, composed of extremely powerful, independent figures who do not naturally obey authority, creates an odd parallel to Luffy's own leadership style. Luffy does not command his crew in a traditional sense. Instead, he attracts individuals who choose to follow him out of personal conviction. In a distorted way, Xebec appears to operate similarly. gathering monstrous personalities whose allegiance is unstable, volatile, and often driven by their own goals. That kind of leadership is not structured like the world government or even most pirate crews. It is chaotic, magnetic, and centered around will rather than hierarchy. And that raises a disturbing question. Why does one of the most feared pirates in history share such an unusual structural similarity with the future pirate king? In One Piece, inherited will is a central theme. But when that concept is applied here, it begins to feel less symbolic and more like a possible narrative mechanism linking two figures separated by time but connected by pattern. The theory of inherited will or identity linkage between Xebec and Luffy becomes more compelling when you consider how both figures challenge the world order in fundamentally different but structurally similar ways. Luffy represents freedom expressed through joy, unpredictability, and refusal to be constrained by systems. Xebec, on the other hand, represents freedom expressed through domination, disruption, and direct confrontation with global authority. On the surface, they are opposites in philosophy, but at a deeper level, they both reject the legitimacy of the existing world structure. They do not seek to operate within it. They seek to redefine or destroy its boundaries entirely. That shared rejection of the system becomes the foundation for the theory that they may be connected not by ideology, but by something deeper, an inherited pattern of will that manifests differently depending on the era and circumstances. In One Piece, inherited will does not always produce identical outcomes. It produces variations of intent shaped by environment, experience, and timing. So the idea that Xebec and Luffy could represent two expressions of the same underlying force is not inherently contradictory. Instead, it suggests a repeating cycle where certain kinds of individuals emerge to challenge the world in ways that escalate across generations. Xebec becomes a historical iteration of that force in its rawest, most destructive form, while Luffy represents its later, more liberated evolution. That framing reframes Xebec not just as a villain of the past, but as a prototype of something the world could not yet fully understand at the time. The God Valley sacrifice theory intensifies this connection even further, because it introduces the idea that Xebec's downfall may not have been a simple defeat, but a structured outcome tied to something larger than personal ambition or marine intervention. If God Valley was already a setup involving bait like the crown jewel, as earlier sections suggest, then Xebec's presence there takes on additional weight. He was not just drawn into a battle. He may have been positioned at the center of a convergence designed to eliminate or transform something about the world structure. In that context, his defeat becomes less about being overpowered and more about being absorbed into a larger event whose purpose extended beyond him. Some interpretations of the theory suggest that Xebec's downfall may have functioned as a kind of sacrifice, not necessarily in a willing sense, but as a necessary collapse point for a system that required his removal in order for other historical outcomes to proceed. That reframes God Valley not as the end of Xebec's ambition, but as a pivot point where his existence was converted into narrative momentum for other figures, including Garp and Roger. And if that is true, then Xebec's role in history is not fully defined by his defeat, but by what his defeat enabled. In that sense, he becomes less of a concluded character and more of a structural requirement within a larger historical equation. His leadership, his ambition, and even his eventual disappearance all begin to feel like components of a system designed to produce specific outcomes rather than random historical evolution. But this is where the implications expand beyond individuals entirely, because once you start treating Xebec, Luffy, and God Valley as interconnected elements of a larger pattern, the focus shifts away from personal history and toward systemic design. The similarities between Xebec's leadership and Luffy's personality stop being interesting coincidences and start becoming evidence of a repeating structure embedded in the world itself. That structure suggests that certain kinds of individuals are not just born randomly, but emerge in response to pressures within the world's hidden framework, pressures tied to power, suppression, freedom, and the unresolved legacy of ancient history. Xebec represents one response to that pressure in the past: aggressive, world-disrupting, and ultimately self-destructive. Luffy represents another response in the present: liberating, chaotic, but fundamentally life-affirming. If both are manifestations of the same underlying force expressed differently across time, then the world of One Piece is not just shaped by individuals. It is shaped by cycles of recurrence, and those cycles may be influenced by events like God Valley, where convergence points, such as the crown jewel theory, suggest that history itself can be guided or distorted to produce specific outcomes. In that framework, Xebec is not an isolated historical figure. He is part of a repeating pattern that includes the rise and fall of forces that challenge the world order. And that leads directly into the most important realization of this section. If Xebec's leadership mirrors Luffy's, and if his downfall at God Valley was not simply a defeat, but part of a larger structural event, then this is not just about individuals anymore. It becomes about the system that produces them, the patterns that repeat through history, and the unseen mechanisms that guide how power and rebellion manifest across generations. Xebec and Luffy are not just characters. They are reflections of something larger than themselves, something that the world has been cycling through without fully understanding. And once you see that pattern clearly, it stops being about who they were and starts being about what keeps bringing them into existence. But this isn't just about individuals. The hidden world map theory becomes far more unsettling when you stop treating locations like Ohara, God Valley, and Sorbet Kingdom as isolated historical events and start seeing them as deliberate points on a structured pattern embedded within the world itself. Because in One Piece, geography is never just geography. It is narrative architecture. Every island carries meaning beyond its surface identity, and when certain locations begin to align thematically, historically, or symbolically, it suggests the existence of a deeper design behind the world's layout. Ohara represents forbidden knowledge and the destruction of history through the Buster Call. God Valley represents a vanished event so significant that even its existence is partially erased. Sorbet Kingdom represents suffering, experimentation, and the subtle manipulation of human life under the world government's influence. On their own, each of these places tells a tragic story, but when placed side by side, they begin to resemble nodes in a hidden network, points where the world's true history intersects with the actions of those trying to control or suppress it. The idea that these locations are connected is not just about narrative coincidence. It is about pattern recognition. Because in a world governed by secrecy, repetition is rarely accidental. When similar themes emerge across different regions, it often signals the presence of a larger system operating beneath the surface. And that system may be encoded not in dialogue or characters, but in geography itself. When you begin mapping these locations conceptually, a strange progression starts to emerge across the blue seas, suggesting that the world's structure may follow an intentional narrative flow rather than a purely natural formation. O'Hara in the West Blue represents the intellectual threat to authority, the pursuit of truth through history. God Valley, located in the West Blue as well, represents the violent suppression of convergence, where multiple world powers collide and erase each other's intentions. Sorbet Kingdom, also tied to the West Blue through Kuma's origin, represents the human cost of experimentation, control, and forced transformation. These are not random tragedies. They form a thematic sequence: knowledge, conflict, and consequence. And when you extend that pattern outward into other seas, the idea of progression becomes even more interesting. The East Blue is often framed as the starting point of many major journeys, including Luffy's, while the Grand Line functions as a destabilized central axis, where history becomes increasingly distorted and unpredictable. If these regions are not just physical spaces but narrative layers, then movement through them is not just travel. It is progression through levels of hidden truth. That would mean the world itself is structured like a coded map, where each sea and island represents a stage in a larger system of revelation. And if that system exists, then events like O'Hara's destruction, God Valley's erasure, and Sorbet's suffering are not isolated incidents. They are markers placed at key structural points to maintain control over how history is understood. This interpretation becomes even more compelling when viewed through the lens of world-building clues scattered throughout the series. The Red Line, the Grand Line, Reverse Mountain, and the Calm Belts are not just natural phenomena. They feel artificially reinforced in their narrative importance, almost as if they are boundaries rather than accidents of geology. The way navigation itself is restricted and distorted across the seas suggests a world designed to be difficult to understand in full. Islands appear and disappear unpredictably. Log pose mechanics prevent linear travel. Information about the world is fragmented, incomplete, or deliberately obscured. And in that environment, locations like O'Hara and God Valley stand out not just because of their historical importance, but because of how aggressively they have been erased or misrepresented. That pattern of selective erasure suggests that the world's map is not just physical, it is informational. Some parts are allowed to be known, others are distorted, and some are completely removed from collective memory. If the crown jewel theory is layered onto this structure, then it becomes possible that certain locations are not just hiding objects or events, they are hiding connections, links between ancient history, present power structures, and future revelations. That would explain why seemingly unrelated places like O'Hara and Sorbet can feel narratively connected despite their differences in geography and purpose. They are not connected by proximity. They are connected by function within the world's hidden structure. The most unsettling implication of the hidden world map theory is that it suggests the world itself may be intentionally fragmented to prevent full understanding of its history. If O'Hara was destroyed for studying the Void Century, if God Valley was erased from records despite involving top-tier figures like Roger and Garp, And if Sorbet Kingdom reflects controlled suffering under unknown influence, then each of these locations represents a different method of historical control: destruction of knowledge, erasure of events, and manipulation of populations. Together, they form a triad of suppression strategies used across different contexts, but serving the same purpose: preventing the reconstruction of a complete historical narrative. That means the world is not just physically divided, it is epistemologically divided. No single perspective can reconstruct the truth without encountering gaps, contradictions, or missing links. And those gaps are not random. They appear strategically at locations where truth would otherwise converge. This is where the idea of a hidden map becomes most powerful, because it suggests that the world structure is actively resisting full interpretation. Even if someone were to chart every island, every event, and every historical record, they would still be missing critical connections that are intentionally obscured. That creates a world where knowledge is inherently incomplete unless viewed through a lens that accounts for suppression itself as part of the system. And that leads directly into the final and most important shift in perspective. If O'Hara, God Valley, and Sorbet are connected nodes in a hidden world structure, then there must be something, or someone, that ties them together in narrative function. Because patterns do not exist in isolation, they require a unifying element to maintain coherence. And when you trace that possibility across all the fragmented clues, the theory naturally begins to converge on the idea that a forgotten or overlooked character may be the key to understanding how these locations interconnect. Someone whose presence, influence, or legacy bridges intellectual destruction, historical erasure, and human experimentation without being fully recognized as the central thread. This figure does not need to be physically present at each location to be relevant. They only need to represent the missing link that explains why these places are structured the way they are within the larger world design. And once that possibility enters the equation, the hidden world map stops being just a theory about geography. It becomes a theory about intentional design. Because if one forgotten character truly ties it all together, then the entire structure of the world is not just divided. It is connected through something deliberately left incomplete. Kong's secret importance in the One Piece world becomes far more intriguing the moment you realize how deliberately limited his appearances are, especially for a character who once held the position of Fleet Admiral and now sits at the highest administrative level within the world government hierarchy. In a story where power structures are usually explored through constant visibility, characters like Sengoku, Akainu, and Garp frequently appearing in major arcs, Kong stands out precisely because he does not. His presence is almost ceremonial, like a figure kept in reserve rather than actively deployed. And that absence creates suspicion. Because in One Piece, when a character of significant rank is not regularly shown, it usually means one of two things. Either their role has concluded, or their role is too sensitive to be exposed frequently. Kong clearly falls into the second category. He is not irrelevant. He is deliberately obscured, and that obscurity makes him feel less like a normal marine official and more like a structural anchor within the world government itself. Someone whose importance is defined not by battlefield presence, but by institutional memory and hidden continuity. Every rare appearance he makes carries weight, not because of what he does, but because of what his existence implies about the deeper hierarchy controlling the Marines and, by extension, the world. When you begin analyzing Kong's visual design and symbolic traits, even more questions start to emerge. His beard, for example, is not just a stylistic detail. It is unusually rigid and structured compared to other high-ranking Marines, almost resembling a symbolic marker rather than a natural aesthetic choice. In One Piece, physical design is rarely accidental. Facial features, scars, and markings often reflect narrative function or thematic alignment. Kong's stern expression and heavily defined facial hair give him an almost statue-like presence, as if he is meant to represent permanence rather than action. He does not feel like a man who participates in events. He feels like a man who oversees them from a position of institutional immobility. That symbolism becomes even more pronounced when you compare him to figures like Garp or Sengoku, whose personalities are expressive, reactive, and emotionally visible. Kong, by contrast, is restrained to the point of abstraction. His limited emotional expression and lack of narrative focus suggest that he is less of a character and more of a symbol of continuity within the world government's hidden structure. Even his markings and uniform presentation feel unusually uniform and controlled, reinforcing the idea that he represents an older layer of the system, one that predates current Marine leadership structures and may be tied to foundational events that are no longer openly discussed. This positions Kong not as a participant in modern conflicts, but as a surviving artifact of an older, more secretive era of governance. The most compelling aspect of Kong's mystery, however, is the possibility of a deeper connection to the celestial dragons, or even the foundational lineage of the world government itself. While he is officially part of the Marine hierarchy, his authority extends beyond typical military boundaries, and his administrative role places him in proximity to decisions that influence the entire global structure. That kind of positioning raises questions about whether his loyalty is purely institutional or whether it is rooted in something older and more foundational than the Marines themselves. The celestial dragons represent the highest visible tier of authority in the world, but even they appear to operate within a system that they do not fully understand or control. Kong's presence, therefore, feels like a bridge between visible authority and invisible governance. He may represent a layer of the world government that predates the modern Marine structure entirely, an administrative continuity that exists to maintain stability across generations of shifting power. If that is the case, then his limited appearances are not accidental. They are structural. He is only shown when necessary, because his presence implies continuity of hidden systems that the story is not always ready to expose. That would also explain why figures like Kong are rarely involved in direct conflict or public decision-making. They operate at a level where visibility itself is a risk. In a world where history is manipulated and information is controlled, the most important figures are often the least visible. This is where Kong's role begins to intersect with broader theories about suppressed history, including events like God Valley, the Crown Jewel mystery, and the hidden mechanisms of the world government. If Kong represents institutional continuity from an earlier era, then his existence suggests that the modern Marine structure is built on top of older, partially concealed systems of control. That means he is not just a high-ranking officer, He is a living link to an older version of the world's power structure, one that may have directly participated in or overseen events that have since been erased or reframed. His silence in major historical discussions becomes more meaningful in this context, because silence in One Piece is often not the absence of knowledge, but the containment of it. Characters who know too much about foundational events are frequently either removed from the narrative or reduced to controlled appearances. Kong's rare presence suggests that he belongs to a category of individuals who are not meant to be questioned directly, because their knowledge or position could destabilize the simplified historical narrative the world government maintains. That makes him less of a supporting character and more of a locked reference point, someone whose existence confirms that there is a deeper layer to the system, even if that layer is never fully revealed. And when you connect that to the broader pattern of hidden locations, erased events, and manipulated histories, Kong begins to look less like a marine official and more like a structural safeguard for secrets that predate even the current governing regime. And then there's Kuma. Kuma's broken mind represents one of the most tragic and unsettling transformations in the entire One Piece narrative, not just because of what happens to him physically, but because of what it implies about identity, autonomy, and the cost of being entangled with the world government's hidden experiments. At the core of his deterioration is the gradual erosion of his will. Once a deeply compassionate and principled man, Kuma becomes something closer to a controlled vessel, stripped of personal agency and reduced to a system-responsive entity. The moment he begins losing control is not sudden. It is incremental, almost clinical in its progression. His personality does not collapse in a single instant. It is carefully dismantled piece by piece through layered interventions that blur the line between punishment and scientific manipulation. What makes this even more disturbing is how quietly it happens within the broader world narrative. Kuma is not defeated in battle in a traditional sense. Instead, he is absorbed into a process that replaces his autonomy with obedience. That shift reframes his story from a simple character tragedy into something far more systemic, suggesting that the world government's true power does not only lie in military force, but in its ability to overwrite identity itself. And once that idea takes hold, every action Kuma performs afterward becomes suspect, not because of his intentions, but because those intentions may no longer be fully his own. The Red Line incident becomes one of the most visually and symbolically powerful moments in understanding Kuma's condition, because it reflects both his physical degradation and his psychological fragmentation. Seeing Kuma repeatedly and uncontrollably collide with the Red Line is not just an image of physical struggle. It is a metaphor for systemic resistance meeting immovable authority. The Red Line, in One Piece, is not just a geographical barrier. It is a symbol of division, control, and enforced separation within the world structure. Kuma's repeated collisions with it suggest a loss of navigational agency, as if his body is still being moved by an internal command structure that no longer aligns with conscious intent. This creates the impression that he is trapped in a loop of forced motion, unable to redirect himself or resist the trajectory imposed upon him. The emotional weight of this is amplified by the contrast between who Kuma once was, a protector, a revolutionary-minded figure capable of deep empathy, and what he has become, a body moving through space without meaningful self-direction. In narrative terms, The red line incident is not just a physical failure. It is a visual confirmation that Kuma's autonomy has been compromised at a fundamental level. And in a world where movement often represents freedom, Kuma's inability to control his own trajectory becomes one of the most tragic forms of imprisonment imaginable. The underlying cause of this transformation points directly toward the world government's experimentation program, which operates at the intersection of science, control, and weaponization of living beings. Kuma's involvement in this system is not accidental. It is the result of deliberate extraction and modification, where his body and mind are treated as components to be repurposed rather than as elements of a living individual. The experiments conducted on him extend beyond simple augmentation. They appear to target the very structure of his consciousness, separating memory, emotion, and will into manipulable layers. This is what makes his condition so unstable, because even when fragments of his personality appear to resurface, they are no longer supported by a unified sense of self. Instead, they exist as isolated echoes within a system that prioritizes external control over internal coherence. The introduction of pacifista programming and later enhancements suggests that Kuma is not just modified, but integrated into a larger technological framework designed to replicate and distribute his capabilities. That means his identity is no longer contained within him alone. It is being replicated, overwritten, and repurposed across multiple entities. In this sense, Kuma stops being a singular character and becomes a node within a network of controlled replication. And the more that the network expands, the more his original identity is diluted, raising the unsettling possibility that what remains of Kuma is not a person in the traditional sense, but a fragmented echo distributed across systems that no longer require his consent to function. But Kuma might not be acting alone. The Seraphim's connection to Kuma escalates the entire experiment narrative from simple body modification into something far more unsettling. The possibility that identity itself has become networked, replicated, and partially shared across multiple bodies that no longer operate as fully independent beings. When you place Kuma alongside the Seraphim program, the first thing that stands out is not just similarity in design or capability, but the implication that his original blueprint may have been used as a foundational template. The Seraphim are not random creations. They are refined, upgraded versions of former warlords, engineered with both biological lineage factors and technological enhancements that blur the boundary between human individuality and manufactured obedience. Kuma's presence within this framework suggests something even more disturbing, that he may not just be a victim of experimentation, but also a prototype whose suffering became the blueprint for a larger system of replication. That shifts his role from isolated tragedy to systemic origin point. Instead of being one broken individual, he becomes the reference model for a class of beings designed to replace autonomy with controllable will. And when you begin to interpret the Seraphim through that lens, every similarity between them and Kuma stops being a coincidence and starts looking like intentional inheritance, pieces of his identity redistributed across a controlled generation of living weapons. The authority chip theory strengthens this interpretation by introducing the idea that control over these beings is not purely physical or technological, but layered through command hierarchies that override even biological autonomy. If the Seraphim respond to authority chips as absolute command triggers, then their behavior is not self-determined. It is externally governed through embedded control mechanisms that define obedience at a structural level. When this concept is extended to Kuma, it raises a disturbing question. If he shares enough biological or engineered structure with the Seraphim, could remnants of similar command logic still exist within him? His apparent loss of will may not be a complete erasure, but rather a permanent suppression layer that allows external inputs to override internal resistance. That would explain why his actions sometimes appear coherent in isolated moments, yet fundamentally disconnected from long-term intent. It also introduces the possibility that Kuma's body is still partially integrated into the same command ecosystem as the Seraphim, even if he is no longer officially classified within that system. In such a scenario, autonomy is not fully destroyed. It is conditional, activated only under specific triggers or overwritten by higher-order commands. That creates a chilling dynamic where Kuma is neither fully free nor fully controlled, but suspended in an unstable state where external authority can intermittently reclaim control over his actions. And if that mechanism exists, it means the Seraphim are not simply his successors. They are extensions of the same control architecture that once consumed him. The idea of shared consciousness takes this even further, suggesting that the connection between Kuma and the Seraphim may not be limited to structural design or command hierarchy, but could extend into a fragmented form of distributed awareness. If the Seraphim inherit more than just physical traits and abilities, if they also inherit partial memory imprints, emotional echoes, or behavioral patterns derived from Kuma's original self, then they become more than weapons. They become carriers of fragmented identity. In that case, Kuma's consciousness is not fully contained within his own broken body. It is partially diffused across multiple entities that reflect different aspects of what he once was. One Seraphim may exhibit his protective instincts in a distorted form. Another may reflect his obedience programming, while another might unknowingly replicate emotional responses tied to his past relationships. This creates a networked identity structure where Kuma's original self is no longer centralized but distributed, fractured into functional fragments that operate independently without awareness of their shared origin. And if those fragments can still interact indirectly through command systems or lineage factor resonance, then the distinction between individual beings and shared consciousness begins to collapse. The Seraphim are no longer just clones or weapons. They become living echoes of a dismantled identity, each carrying pieces of a person who no longer exists in a unified form. That possibility reframes Kuma's tragedy entirely. He is not just losing himself, he is being multiplied into a system that no longer recognizes him as a singular entity. And that leads to something even more dangerous. The concept of green blood immediately pushes the entire One Piece scientific hierarchy into a far more unsettling direction, because it suggests that devil fruit abilities, once thought to be mysterious, almost mystical gifts of nature, may actually be replicable, engineered, and refined through artificial biological systems. If green blood represents a perfected evolution of SAD technology, then it is not just a byproduct of experimentation. It is a controlled medium designed to replicate the core effects of devil fruits in a stabilized, transferable form. That idea alone fundamentally changes how power works in the world. Instead of devil fruits being singular, irreplaceable anomalies tied to fate or rarity, Green blood implies a parallel system where those abilities can be extracted, synthesized, and implanted into compatible hosts. This reframes power from something mystical into something manufactured, shifting the balance of the world from natural hierarchy to engineered distribution. The implications are massive because it suggests that the world government is not just studying devil fruits, they are attempting to industrialize them. And green blood becomes the final stage of that ambition, a refined substance capable of carrying devil fruit properties in a stable biological format without requiring traditional consumption. That means abilities once bound to singular users could, in theory, be reproduced or distributed across multiple engineered beings. In a world already built on rare powers and unique awakenings, this kind of replication system introduces a level of control that completely destabilizes the natural unpredictability of devil fruit users. If green blood truly is a perfected version of SAD, then its role extends beyond replication and into enhancement, because the stabilization of devil fruit-like abilities suggests not only transferability, but also optimization. Unlike standard artificial fruits, which often produce unstable or incomplete results, green blood appears to allow for more precise control over how abilities manifest in the host. This could explain why Seraphim units demonstrate such consistent and refined use of powers compared to traditional devil fruit users, who often require experience, emotional triggers, or awakening conditions to fully access their abilities. Green blood may remove those uncertainties, embedding the power directly into the biological framework of the subject in a way that allows immediate and controlled usage. That also introduces a darker implication. If abilities can be standardized, then individuality in power expression becomes secondary to system design. Users are no longer discovering their abilities. They are executing pre-engineered functions. And that shifts the entire philosophy of devil fruit power from chaotic evolution to structured deployment. It also explains why the world government would invest heavily in such research, because controllable power is far more valuable than unpredictable strength. In this framework, green blood is not just an innovation. It is a step toward full militarization of biological capability. And once power becomes standardized, the line between soldier and weapon disappears entirely. Beyond power replication, green blood also appears to influence physical enhancement on a more fundamental level, particularly in terms of lifespan extension and mutation control. This is where the theory becomes even more disturbing, because it suggests that green blood is not only about granting abilities, but also about rewriting the biological limits of the body itself. If it can stabilize devil fruit traits while simultaneously extending life expectancy or preventing degradation, then it functions as both an empowerment system and a preservation system. That duality is critical, because it means the world government is not only interested in creating stronger fighters, they are also interested in maintaining long-term control over those fighters without natural biological decline interfering with performance. In practical terms, green blood could allow certain individuals or units to remain in peak condition far beyond normal human limits, effectively decoupling strength from aging. That would explain the near-constant effectiveness of high-level experimental units, and could also tie into broader themes of artificially sustained authority within the world government. If longevity can be engineered alongside power, then hierarchy becomes self-preserving. Leaders and weapons alike can remain active indefinitely, reducing the natural turnover that usually disrupts power structures. That creates a system where control is not only enforced through strength, but also maintained through biological continuity. And in a world already filled with suppressed history and manipulated records, extending the lifespan of key assets becomes a direct method of stabilizing institutional dominance across generations. But this ties directly into an ancient weapon. Shirahoshi's power as Poseidon is usually framed as one of the most mystical and destiny-bound abilities in One Piece. But when you start reinterpreting it through the lens of experimentation, lineage manipulation, and systems like green blood and ancient weapon theory, the entire concept begins to feel far less like pure fate and far more like a controlled biological phenomenon that has been misunderstood for centuries. On the surface, Shirahoshi's ability to command Sea Kings appears to be an inherited trait that awakens once in a generation, tied to prophecy and the natural cycle of history. But the structure of that cycle itself, appearing roughly every 200 years, already raises questions about whether this is truly natural or whether it follows a hidden pattern imposed by forces that predate current world understanding. If Poseidon is not simply a chosen ability, but part of a system embedded into certain bloodlines or genetic structures, then Shirahoshi is not just a passive recipient of destiny. She is the latest expression of a recurring biological activation. That reframes her existence from mystical inheritance to engineered recurrence, where the cycle is not random at all, but regulated or triggered by environmental, genetic, or even external technological conditions. In that sense, the Sea Kings themselves are not simply responding to willpower. They may be responding to a signal embedded in a lineage that has been shaped or preserved over centuries. And once you accept that possibility, Poseidon stops being just a mythic weapon and starts resembling a biological control system that has been hidden inside history itself. The idea of experimentation becomes even more unsettling when you consider the possibility that Shirahoshi's lineage may have been influenced indirectly through ancient interference rather than direct modern manipulation. If systems like green blood represent the world government's ability to replicate or stabilize devil fruit-like abilities artificially, then it is not unreasonable to extend that logic backward and consider that older civilizations may have also experimented with biological power transfer or enhancement, albeit in more primitive or ritualized forms. The Ryugu Kingdom, isolated beneath the sea and tied closely to Fishman Island's unique evolutionary environment, provides a perfect setting for long-term genetic preservation or controlled lineage development without external interference. If Poseidon's emergence follows a strict temporal cycle, then that suggests either a deeply embedded biological timer or an external mechanism that ensures activation only under specific conditions. This raises the possibility that Shirahoshi's power is not simply inherited, but reactivated, meaning the ability exists dormant within a structured genetic framework that only expresses itself when certain environmental or historical conditions align. That would explain why Poseidon is never continuously active across generations. It is not a constant ability, but a dormant system that reboots at intervals tied to global equilibrium. And if that system was ever influenced or observed by ancient civilizations that understood how to manipulate life factors or lineage structures, then Shirahoshi's existence may represent the latest iteration of something far older and more controlled than the world realizes. The 200-year cycle mystery becomes even more significant when viewed alongside other long-term patterns in One Piece history, because it suggests that key events and abilities may be synchronized across multiple systems rather than occurring independently. If Poseidon appears every 200 years, then the question is not just why Shirahoshi, but why now? What conditions in the world align at these intervals that allow the ability to manifest? And more importantly, who or what benefits from that timing? If ancient weapons like Poseidon, Pluton, and Uranus are part of a larger structural system designed to maintain or reset world balance, then their activation cycles may be deliberately staggered or synchronized to prevent any single faction from gaining overwhelming control. That would mean Poseidon is not just a weapon, it is a regulatory mechanism embedded in the world's deeper architecture. The Sea Kings themselves, massive and ancient beings tied to the ocean's deepest layers, may function as both guardians and enforcers of this system, responding only when the correct lineage signal appears. Shirahoshi's emotional instability and lack of control over her power could also be interpreted through this lens, suggesting that she is not fully integrated into the system yet, or that her activation is still incomplete. That creates a dangerous gap between potential and control, meaning the power exists in full scale, but lacks a stabilizing interface. And in a world where powers are increasingly being studied, replicated, and weaponized through systems like green blood, an uncontrolled ancient weapon becomes both an opportunity and a threat to any faction aware of its existence, but the real puppet master might already be watching. Imu's true power becomes far more unsettling when you frame it not as simple political authority or symbolic shadow ruler status, but as a refined biological and physiological mastery over the concept of life itself, something that closely aligns with the advanced interpretation of life return. In One Piece, life return is already established as a technique that allows users to manipulate their body from the inside, controlling everything from muscle structure to fat distribution, hair movement, and even organ function. It is essentially the art of turning the body into a fully conscious, self-modifiable system. When you scale that idea upward and apply it to Imu, the implication becomes something far more dangerous than combat enhancement. It suggests total biological sovereignty, not just over one's own body, but potentially over the bodies of others. If Imu's longevity is not simply the result of time manipulation or unknown devil fruit effects, but instead an advanced, perfected form of life return, then their existence becomes less like a ruler and more like a self-sustaining biological system that has learned to continuously rewrite its own limitations. That would explain the apparent defiance of aging, the stability across centuries, and the almost myth-like presence that surrounds their identity. Imu is not just surviving history. They are actively maintaining themselves as a constant within it, refining internal processes to resist decay at a level no normal human or even enhanced being has demonstrated. In that interpretation, immortality is not granted. It is maintained through continuous internal control. When extended beyond self-regulation, the concept of life return applied to Imu begins to suggest the possibility of external control over other living beings, which transforms the ability from personal mastery into systemic domination. If a refined version of life return allows not only internal bodily manipulation, but also influence over biological states in others. Then it becomes a form of biological coercion disguised as authority. This would explain phenomena where individuals appear to lose autonomy, experience sudden behavioral shifts, or operate under unseen pressure despite no visible external control mechanism. In such a framework, Imu's influence does not need to be constantly visible or physically enforced. It would operate through subtle biological overrides, potentially affecting nervous systems, emotional states, or even decision-making pathways at a physiological level. That would make traditional concepts of loyalty, fear, or obedience less about ideology and more about induced biological alignment. It also recontextualizes the eerie consistency of control within the highest levels of the world government, where the Gorosei and other figures appear to act with near unified intent despite their individual authority. If they are all partially subject to the same underlying biological influence, then their cohesion is not political, it is physiological synchronization. That shifts Imu from a ruler supported by institutions into something closer to a central biological controller embedded at the core of the world's power structure. The longevity aspect of Imu's power becomes especially significant when compared to other known attempts at extending life within the One Piece world, such as technological enhancements, devil fruit effects, or experimental substances like those tied to advanced science programs. Unlike those methods, which often come with instability, visible side effects, or narrative limitations, Imu's apparent immortality shows none of the typical degradation patterns associated with artificial extension. That suggests a system that is not merely prolonging life, but actively maintaining equilibrium within biological processes to prevent collapse entirely. If life return is about conscious control of the body's internal systems, then Imu's version may operate at a level where aging itself is continuously regulated, slowed, or reset before it can manifest. This creates a condition where time does not damage the body in the traditional sense, because the body is constantly being recalibrated to its optimal state. In that sense, Imu is not just living longer, they are actively preventing the concept of biological decline from taking hold. That kind of control implies either extreme mastery of an internal technique developed over centuries, or access to an external system that supports or amplifies that control at a scale far beyond individual capability. Either possibility positions Imu as something fundamentally different from other long-lived figures in the series, because their longevity is not passive. It is actively maintained through continuous, unseen intervention. And if that intervention extends beyond themselves, it raises the possibility that Imu's power is not isolated but systemic, embedded into the very structure of how authority and biology interact in the world. But there's one weakness. Fear as a weapon in the world of One Piece is not just an emotional theme. It becomes a structural mechanism that influences how power itself functions, especially when you examine how certain abilities appear to weaken, distort, or even shut down under psychological pressure. Across multiple encounters in the series, fear is shown to disrupt focus, break willpower, and reduce access to advanced techniques that normally depend on mental clarity. Haki, for example, is deeply tied to resolve and emotional stability, meaning that fear directly interferes with one of the most fundamental power systems in the world. When that idea is expanded, fear stops being just a reaction and becomes a control variable, something that can be induced, manipulated, and maintained in order to regulate the strength of individuals or entire populations. In that framework, fear is not just an effect of power imbalance. It becomes a tool used to sustain that imbalance. If a governing force understands this principle at a deep level, then they do not need to constantly overpower opponents physically. Instead, they only need to maintain a psychological environment where fear is persistent enough to suppress full potential. That shifts the entire concept of dominance from physical superiority to emotional regulation. And in a world already shaped by hidden rulers and suppressed history, that kind of control mechanism fits seamlessly into a broader system where truth, memory, and power are all carefully managed. When applied to Emu, this idea becomes significantly more disturbing because it suggests that their authority may not rely solely on visible force or political structure, but on sustained psychological dominance over fear itself. If Emu operates at the level of controlling perception and emotional response across individuals or institutions, then fear becomes the invisible infrastructure supporting their rule. The Gorosei, the world government, and even the broader enforcement systems could be operating under a layered hierarchy of fear conditioning, where obedience is reinforced not just through commands, but through deeply embedded psychological constraints. In such a system, fear is not always overt. It does not need constant demonstrations of violence. Instead, it can exist as an ambient condition, a constant awareness of consequences that shapes behavior before action is even taken. That makes resistance far more difficult, because individuals are not just opposing authority, they are overcoming an internalized expectation of punishment. If Emu is positioned at the center of this structure, then their power is not limited to issuing orders. It extends into maintaining the emotional environment in which those orders are automatically followed. That transforms fear into a governance tool rather than a byproduct of governance. And when fear becomes structural rather than situational, it becomes self-sustaining, requiring only occasional reinforcement to maintain control across vast systems. This is where Luffy becomes a critical contradiction within that framework, because his defining trait, his lack of fear in the face of overwhelming power, positions him as an anomaly that does not respond to the same control mechanisms. Luffy does not suppress fear through training or discipline in the traditional sense. Instead, he appears to bypass it entirely when it conflicts with his will or emotional conviction. That does not mean he is incapable of fear, but rather that fear does not anchor his decision-making in the same way it does for others. In systems where fear is used as a limiting factor, that kind of psychological independence becomes extremely dangerous because it removes one of the primary constraints that govern behavior. If abilities are weakened by fear, then a character who does not internalize fear in critical moments effectively operates outside the expected limitations of the system. That makes Luffy a natural counter to any structure that relies on psychological suppression, including one potentially governed or influenced by Emu. His growth through confrontation, his tendency to escalate under pressure rather than retreat, and his consistent refusal to accept imposed hierarchy all contribute to a behavioral pattern that destabilizes fear-based control systems. In narrative terms, Luffy does not just resist authority, he disrupts the mechanism that authority depends on. That is why encounters involving overwhelming power often result in Luffy surpassing expectations rather than collapsing under pressure. The system assumes fear will limit output. Luffy does not follow that assumption. and in a world where fear is potentially weaponized at a structural level that makes him not just a threat, but an exception that cannot be easily categorized or controlled. Which brings us to the final truth. The idea that the world of One Piece was broken on purpose begins to feel less like abstract theorizing and more like a structural reinterpretation of everything we've seen once you apply the Pangea-style world theory to its geography. Instead of the current map being a naturally formed arrangement of seas, continents, and anomalies like the Grand Line, Reverse Mountain, and the Calm Belts, this theory suggests that the world was originally a unified supercontinent, an ancient Pangea-like structure where civilizations, cultures, and power systems existed in closer proximity before being violently separated by a catastrophic global event. In that original state, travel, trade, and knowledge exchange would have been fundamentally different, meaning the current fragmentation of the world is not a natural evolutionary outcome, but a deliberate structural shift. The idea that the world was once whole reframes everything from navigation systems to political divisions as consequences of a single catastrophic restructuring event rather than gradual geological drift. It also provides a foundation for understanding why information is so heavily controlled and why history itself is so fragmented. If the world were intentionally broken, then fragmentation is not just physical, it is informational, cultural, and political. Every sea, every isolated kingdom, every restricted passage becomes part of a system designed to prevent reconnection. In that sense, the current world is not simply divided, it is engineered to remain divided. The role of Uranus in this theory becomes central, because if ancient weapons like Pluton and Poseidon represent localized or thematic forces within the world's hidden structure, then Uranus represents something far more fundamental: global-scale transformation. The idea that Uranus could have been responsible for destroying the original continent suggests that it is not merely a weapon of destruction in the conventional sense, but a system capable of altering the very architecture of the planet. That elevates it beyond anything seen in modern conflicts, placing it in the category of civilization-ending technology. If Uranus was used to break apart the supercontinent, then the current world map, with its scattered seas, isolated islands, and extreme navigational anomalies, becomes the aftermath of a single coordinated event rather than a series of unrelated geological phenomena. The Grand Line, with its unpredictable weather and magnetic instability, can be interpreted as a residual effect of that restructuring, a kind of scar left across the planet where normal navigation was intentionally destabilized. Even the Red Line, which divides the world into distinct hemispheres, begins to look less like a natural formation and more like a constructed barrier, an artificial wall designed to enforce separation at a global scale. If Uranus was involved in creating or triggering this transformation, then the weapon itself is not just destructive, it is architectural, reshaping how civilization can exist and interact. That means the world we see today is not just the result of ancient war damage, it is the result of deliberate reconfiguration. The creation of the Red Line becomes one of the most important consequences of this ancient war origin theory, because it represents more than just geography. It represents enforced division. Unlike other natural formations, the Red Line is unusually absolute in its function, acting as a near unbreakable barrier that separates the world into distinct regions and limits direct interaction between them. Its structure and positioning feel too precise to be purely accidental, especially when combined with the existence of Reverse Mountain and the Grand Line, which together create a controlled system of entry, movement, and restriction across the world's seas. If the original continent was destroyed by a global-scale event involving Uranus, then the red line may be the physical remnant or engineered aftermath of that destruction, either a leftover ridge of continental collapse or a deliberately constructed structure designed to stabilize the broken world in a controlled configuration. In either case, its function is consistent. It prevents reunification. That suggests that the world is not simply divided by history. It is actively maintained in a state of separation, and that maintenance implies intent. Someone, or something, benefits from a world that cannot easily reconnect its fragments. Whether that is for control, suppression of knowledge, or prevention of ancient power reactivation, the red line becomes more than a landmark. It becomes a lock. And locks imply the existence of something worth keeping sealed. The ancient war that triggered all of this becomes the final piece that ties the theory together, because it suggests that the world's fragmentation was not a singular accident, but the result of a conflict so large and so ideologically significant that it required the restructuring of reality itself to resolve or contain. If civilizations were advanced enough to create weapons like Uranus, Pluton, and Poseidon, then the scale of their conflict likely extended beyond conventional warfare into existential or ideological territory, something that threatened not just kingdoms, but the entire framework of civilization. In that context, breaking the world apart may have been seen as a solution rather than a consequence. By separating populations, destroying centralized power structures, and isolating knowledge systems, the aftermath of the war effectively prevents any single force from regaining the full scope of ancient capabilities. Each sea becomes a compartment of history, each island a fragmented archive of a larger truth that can no longer be fully assembled without extraordinary effort. That would also explain why so many key historical events are erased or hidden, because they are pieces of a larger system that no longer exists in complete form. The world is not just post-war, it is post-reconstruction. And every major structure we see today, from geography to governance, can be interpreted as part of a long-term stabilization effort following that ancient collapse. And the crown jewel might be the key to fixing everything. The truth about the crown jewel becomes far more unsettling when you stop treating it as just another legendary treasure and start seeing it as a symbolic convergence point for everything the world of One Piece is built upon. Because at this stage of the theory, the crown jewel is no longer just an object. It becomes an idea embedded into the structure of history itself. If it truly connects events like God Valley, the Rock's pirates, Shanks' mysterious past, and the hidden actions of figures like Roger and Garp, then its significance cannot be limited to wealth or physical treasure. Instead, it begins to resemble something far more abstract, a representation of legitimacy, authority, or even the hidden key to the world's true structure. In that sense, the crown jewel stops being something that can simply be found and taken. It becomes something that defines who is allowed to shape the future of the world. That would explain why so many powerful figures are indirectly tied to it without ever explicitly acknowledging its existence. Roger's journey, Shanks's unexplained origins, Buggy's absurd but persistent proximity to major historical events, and Luffy's rising role as a destabilizing force all begin to intersect around this concept. The crown jewel may not be a prize at the end of a path. It may be the thing that defines the path itself. And if that is true, then the entire history of piracy, revolution, and the world government's control systems may have been structured around containing, protecting, or concealing its real function. When you interpret the crown jewel as more than treasure, it begins to align disturbingly well with the idea of a symbolic pirate king authority. Not just a title, but a conceptual mechanism that determines who can fundamentally reshape the world order. In that interpretation, becoming the Pirate King is not about finding one piece alone, but about reaching a point of alignment with whatever the crown jewel represents. That could mean control over ancient systems, access to suppressed history, or even the ability to unify fractured world structures that were intentionally separated in the past. This is where Buggy, Luffy, and Shanks form an unexpectedly important triad within the theory. Buggy represents accidental proximity to destiny, constantly being placed near major historical events without direct intention, yet somehow benefiting from the perception of importance. Luffy represents pure will-driven disruption, someone who moves through the world breaking imposed structures without fully understanding their depth. Shanks represents controlled intervention, the one who seems to understand more than he reveals, acting as a stabilizing or guiding force that subtly redirects major events. If all three are connected to the crown jewel in different ways, then it suggests the treasure is not just something to be obtained, but something that influences how different philosophies of power interact with the world. It becomes a mirror that reflects intent, chaos, freedom, control, and accidental destiny, all converging around a single hidden axis. That would explain why the crown jewel remains undefined despite decades of narrative buildup. It is not meant to be understood in material terms alone, but in functional and symbolic ones. The deeper implication of this theory is that the crown jewel may have never truly been lost in the traditional sense, but instead continuously preserved, hidden, or protected by forces operating outside normal historical awareness. If such a critical object or concept existed at the center of world-altering events like God Valley, then its survival would not be left to chance. It would require deliberate safeguarding by individuals or groups who understand its significance at a level far beyond ordinary pirates or marines. This raises the possibility that the crown jewel is not hidden in a single physical location, but maintained through a distributed system of protection, whether that be secret factions, hidden knowledge networks, or even individuals unknowingly carrying pieces of its truth. That would also explain why no one has ever conclusively claimed it, despite the scale of effort invested in uncovering historical secrets across the world. It is not simply hidden. It is actively preserved from being fully understood. In that context, figures like Roger may not have failed to claim it, but may have chosen not to disrupt the system protecting it. Shanks's silence and strategic positioning could reflect awareness of its role within a larger balance. Even Buggy's bizarre survival of major historical moments begins to look less like comedy and more like structural placement within a system that ensures certain individuals remain near the crown jewel's orbit. And if Luffy is truly aligned with inherited will and the breaking of imposed systems, then his eventual approach toward this concept is not just discovery, it is a collision with a carefully maintained equilibrium. This leads directly into the most unsettling question embedded in the entire theory. If the crown jewel was never truly lost, then it must have been continuously protected by something or someone throughout history. And that raises implications far beyond pirates or treasure hunters. Protection at this scale suggests awareness of its true function and the consequences of its exposure. Whether that protection comes from the remnants of ancient civilizations, hidden world government mechanisms, or individuals operating outside recorded history, the fact remains that something has ensured it never fully enters uncontrolled circulation. That means the crown jewel is not just a prize waiting at the end of a journey, it is a stabilized point in a system designed to prevent collapse or revelation. And if multiple powerful figures orbit it without fully interacting with it, then its protection is not passive. It is active, adaptive, and deeply integrated into the world's structure. This transforms the entire narrative tension around it, because it is no longer about who finds the treasure first, but about what system decides who is even allowed to reach it. The idea that Roger, Shanks, and others may have all encountered the crown jewel in different forms but never fully claimed or revealed it suggests a shared understanding that its exposure could destabilize something fundamental. That elevates the crown jewel from a mystery object to a controlled secret at the heart of the world's balance. And that brings everything to its final, most dangerous implication. If the crown jewel was never lost, who's been protecting it this whole time? And what happens when Luffy finally finds it?